Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're dissecting a case that is just absolutely chilling, and it's captured national attention for good reason. We're talking about the disappearance of 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie, the mother of today's show host, Savannah Guthrie. Her vanishing has left investigators grappling with a mystery that honestly just seems to deepen as time goes on. In this explainer, we're going to stick strictly to the facts and data available from the ongoing investigation, really focusing in on the complex forensic delays that are currently stalling the entire case.
It's been nearly 4 months since Nancy vanished into the desert night. Now, normally with high-profile cases like this, we're all kind of conditioned to expect rapid breakthroughs, right? We expect modern science to just swoop in and give us absolute clarity immediately. But instead of swift answers, the silence coming from the laboratories processing this evidence is becoming literally as deafening as the disappearance itself. It's an agonizing wait for the family, and it's incredibly perplexing for everyone following the investigation.
So, what does this all mean? The crucial question we really need to explore today is simply, why hasn't science solved this case yet? Why has the promise of immediate clarity turned into this frustrating labyrinth of delays? To figure that out, we have to look right past the sensational headlines and break down the actual scientific bottlenecks, the mixed genetic profiles, and even some growing conflicts between the authorities handling the evidence.
Let's start by looking at the Tucson timeline and those final digital footprints.
You know, if you think about your own home, our digital footprints basically track our every move. Nancy was last seen on January 31st after a dinner with her family, but it's the early morning hours of February 1st that give us the only concrete clues to her final moments at home. At exactly 1:47 a.m., her Nest doorbell camera was abruptly disconnected. Less than an hour later, at 2:28 a.m., the monitoring app for her pacemaker lost all contact. Boom! Her digital presence was completely severed, and that marks the exact window when she was taken.
Moving on to the physical evidence, the fragments of a crime.
Investigators didn't walk into a neat, tidy scene with a smoking gun. It was more like a scattered puzzle. They found blood droplets inside the house and trailing right across the front porch. They recovered hair samples, providing what everyone hoped would be a definitive biological lead. And from FBI footage, we learned a masked suspect wearing a backpack and gloves was seen tampering with the security system. Later, gloves matching those seen on the suspect were actually recovered near the scene. So they have these absolutely critical physical clues, but as we'll see, having clues isn't the same as having answers.
And here's where it gets incredibly frustrating. Law enforcement has been flooded with tens of thousands of leads, but so often, promising clues just evaporate upon closer inspection. For example, there was a black glove found later on March 4th that generated a ton of hope, but it turned out to be a total dead end. It was simply traced back to an unrelated restaurant worker. So despite this massive influx of tips, the physical evidence collected right at the very beginning remains the primary and honestly, maybe the only real path forward.
Which brings us to the core issue, the DNA bottleneck, and unraveling that genetic code. 5. That's the number of separate laboratories across the country currently wrestling with this DNA evidence. This isn't just a simple, straightforward swab test. The evidence is caught in this massive forensic dragnet spanning all the way from a private lab in Florida to the FBI's state-of-the-art facility in Quantico. Having 5 labs working simultaneously just highlights how desperate and complicated this search for a match has actually become.
So why the holdup? Well, forensic expert Tiffany Roy points to a really complex hurdle, mixed DNA profiles. The biological samples recovered from the scene aren't pristine at all. They contain genetic material from more than one individual. Imagine trying to read a single sentence where 2 completely different sentences have been printed right on top of each other. That's the challenge here. Isolating a suspect's unique genetic markers from Nancy's or whoever else was there is a painstakingly difficult scientific hurdle.
Because of that, scientists have to go through this incredibly slow, meticulous process. First, they have to use next-generation sequencing just to decode the degraded genetic material. Once they actually get a viable profile, they have to build out complex family trees through genealogy tracing. And finally, they try to identify probabilistic matches to locate a suspect within that tree. Every single one of these steps takes an immense amount of time, turning what we think should be rapid science into a grinding, months-long endeavor.
Now, all of this complex science introduces another massive hurdle, the legal risks.
As criminal defense attorney Joshua G. Schiffer points out, these agonizing, months-long delays don't just hurt the family, they hand a massive advantage to any future defense team. Think about it. Every day that passes, every single time evidence is transferred between those 5 different labs, it creates an opportunity for a defense attorney to question the integrity of the evidence handling, the collection, or the analysis itself. Schiffer actually highlights a really fascinating point. The very science being used to solve the crime is a double-edged sword. The sheer complexity of mixed DNA is incredibly hard for everyday jurors to interpret. On top of that, genealogy tracing relies on probabilistic matches, not absolute certainties, which raises a ton of privacy concerns and makes the method super vulnerable to being challenged in court. So, in the pursuit of finding a suspect, investigators are inadvertently creating complexities that could easily derail a trial down the line.
And beyond the science, we're also looking at a bureaucratic power struggle, the FBI versus the sheriff.
There's this highly public and honestly pretty unusual rift happening right now between federal and local authorities. On one side, FBI Director Kash Patel has claimed that the Pima County Sheriff's Department essentially kept the Bureau out for 4 critical days at the start of the investigation, potentially compromising evidence. But then, on the flip side, Sheriff Chris Nanos has pushed back hard. He's calling Patel's claims factually inaccurate and insists the FBI was involved literally from day one. Regardless of who's right here, this friction is just adding to the agonizing weight and public confusion.
So, driven by the lack of tangible progress and all that public infighting, it seems the grieving family is taking matters into their own hands. Reports are emerging that Savannah Guthrie is hiring her own private team of former federal agents. I mean, when a family feels they have to assemble a private team to bypass the official investigation, it really underscores just how severe the communication breakdown and forensic bottlenecks have become.
So where does that leave us? Let's look at the unfinished search.
Despite all the public friction, the huge gaps in the timeline, and those intense scientific bottlenecks, Pima County officials are standing firm. They insist this is absolutely not a cold case. It is active and ongoing. More importantly, they state they are getting closer to identifying the source of the blood evidence found at the home. They're basically placing all their hope squarely on the science finally catching up.
Which leaves us with this haunting final thought as we close out this explainer. Will the slow, meticulous gears of science finally find Nancy Guthrie? Or have these 4 months of delays and mixed profiles already allowed her abductor to vanish forever into the complexity of the genetic code? It's a sobering reminder of the very real limits of modern forensic science. Thanks so much for joining me today.